Hey folks, this is TEL'ARN. Let's have a look at the High Botanist TEL'ARN encounter on Mythic difficulty. For this video I'm going to assume you're familiar with the fight on Heroic. If not, there will be a link in the description below for you to go view that video first. TEL'ARN will use all of the same abilities as he does in Heroic, except you start the fight facing all three versions of the Botanist. This means that the first phase of Mythic difficulty is basically the last phase of Heroic, but a little harder because the bosses don't share health pools anymore. When you kill one of the bosses, the others that are left will heal to full. This means that while you're facing three bosses to begin with, this fight is very much a single target focused encounter. There is no benefit to cleaving the bosses unless doing so will increase your single target damage. When you kill one of the TEL'ARNs, their abilities will be incorporated into the remaining boss's abilities. That means depending on who you kill first, this fight can play out differently. For this guide we'll be killing the Naturalist first, then the Arcanist, and finishing off with the Solarist. For this fight we used 2 tanks, 4 healers and 14 DPS, and we started by tanking the tops on top of the orb spawn location closest to where the bosses start, with ranged and healers split evenly on either side. The first phase will last until the Naturalist is dead and plays out exactly like Heroic in Phase 3. You'll have parasitic fetters which need to be dispelled and the adds nukes down, plasma orbs which should be handled in the typical fashion, nuking one, assigning a few ranged to work on the second so it detonates after your first buff expires, and letting the third orb expire on its own. Controlled chaos which you will simply need to move for, solar collapse which will need to be avoided, grace of nature puddles to keep the bosses out of, the call of night debuffs which need to be apart but with a friend, and all of the tank swap mechanics. You'll also have toxic spores start spawning from the very start, so make sure to clear these periodically using immunities. The first phase is pretty simple, just deal with all the mechanics as they come at you and keep things clean. Things start to get interesting when the Naturalist dies. For the second phase, we changed locations to the orb spawn point closest to where you enter the Botanist's area, but kept the positioning mostly the same, ranged and healers spread evenly on each side. You won't have parasitic fetter cast on anyone anymore, but when a plasma orb dies, they will spawn 2 of the fetter adds. Make sure melee move away from them as they spawn on the orb you're stacking, and have your range deal with the other adds from the other orbs as they pop up. The Call of Night ability changes a little as well. You should still handle it in the same way, but try to be a little outside of your group because Call of Night targets will periodically drop the toxic spores around them. Throughout this phase you will still have to deal with Controlled Chaos and Solar Collapse, so make sure you're always on your toes. Phase 3 starts when the Arcanist goes down, and you'll need to make sure you're in position a little beforehand because the transition can get a little messy. We tanked the boss between the 2 orb spawns and stacked up tightly, but you need to make sure no one is stood near the tank with aggro. That's because a lot of abilities start getting rolled into one here. The Flare ability, which is cast at tanks, will apply the Parasitic Fetter Snare. When that snare is dispelled or broken, 2 adds and a Controlled Chaos will spawn. That means only the tank with aggro can get hit by Flare at any time, and no one can get hit by the adds after they spawn. Otherwise you'll get an unmanageable amount of adds and Controlled Chaos will start spawning everywhere. To handle this, you want your tank to just hold the snare effect and get healed up through it. When the damage is getting to be too much, you need to dispel it and move for the Control Chaos. We moved over to be between another 2 orb spawn locations, and your ranged will need to destroy the adds that spawn so they don't chain snare people. During this phase you'll still get plasma orbs spawning that you'll need to deal with, but they won't spawn any fetters when they die. They will, however, drop a bunch of toxic spores. These need to be avoided, but are quite useful for the next ability. Call of Night will still go on to 2 people, but with a slight difference. The targets of Call of Night will also spawn solar collapses on their location. To deal with this, we had the Call of Night move away from the raid in opposite directions and stand at max range. We sent 1 raid member with each to prevent the Call of Night AoEing the raid, and if they're out far enough, the solar collapse should spawn away from the stacked raid, so only the Call of Night target and their buddy will have to deal with dodging it. To cheese this mechanic a little, we actually had our 2nd and 4th sets of Call of Night kill themselves by running into a bunch of toxic spores. That allowed us to clear the spores, and you ignore those Call of Nights entirely, which also means we didn't get any solar collapses from them. If you go with the suicide route, make sure you have battle reses available to get those people up immediately so you don't lose too much time on the boss. This last phase is all about control and burn, so make sure you save any big cooldowns for the start of this phase, which includes Bloodlust. The hardest part of this phase is dealing with the Call of Night and the Solar Collapse cleanly, so if you get that down, you should see a kill before too long. And that's all you should need to take down High Botanist TEL'ARN on Mythic difficulty. If you have any questions or queries, please leave them in the comments section below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Or hop on over to Discord, we have a server at discord.gg/Kalani, great place to come ask questions or just hang out. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.